First one has to do with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I suppose isn't technically on the right, but is, I think, is cheered on by people who are, because of his feelings about vaccines. And in, I mean, I basically think if you subtract the vaccine issue and a couple others, he's just sort of a mediocre Democrat. But in any case, this is, RFK has come up in a big way because of an offer that was extended to him to go on the Joe Rogan show to debate Peter Hotez, who's a vaccine scientist and popularizer of vaccine science and kind of very avid debunker of conspiracy theories. And basically Hotez had been on Rogan, and then Hotez got mad about RFK's appearance on Rogan, and then he and Rogan himself went back and forth about it, and Rogan was like, "Hey, you should come on, and do a debate with Hotez." And look, it's 2023. The culture war eats everything like instantly. That's just how it works. So people, like, anytime anything happens, people will immediately draw battle lines about it and say the opposite of whatever the thing that that the people that they most dislike say, because that is just the nature of the beast. So I think I think it can be very difficult to kind of force yourself sometimes, especially if you're on Twitter a lot and all of that. I am I'm in no position to judge, right? I'm like the guy with the rolled up dollar bill still hanging out of his nose saying we should all do less coke, but like, even so, right? Like, I think it is really useful to step back and be like, okay, let's stop, like, get out of the mode of like owning your enemies and just sort of think about what you actually think about this, given what you care about. And my feeling, so I actually wrote an article about for this about the Daily Beast. I've not talked about it, I think, with Jake for like a minute, but Andy not at all. So I have no idea what you guys think. So I'd be curious what your takes are about this. But the article is called "Here's Why Legitimate Scientists Should Debate RFK Jr." And and I think that I actually think Hotez should do it. I think that this is not some guy who was just sort of like quietly showing up to work in his lab and then randomly he's been asked to do this. He's written books. He wrote a book called "Vaccines Didn't Cause Rachel's Autism" that's like all about debunking conspiracy theories. He he's on, he does media all the, he's on MSNBC all the time for this purpose, etc. And so all of which I mentioned just to say that, like, I actually think he'd be pretty well positioned to do this. He's, I think, I think he's pretty good on TV. I think the way a lot of people talk about this is like, oh, like it's like they're portrayed RFK Jr. as if he's some like super charismatic force of nature who's just gonna like eat any hapless scientist who crosses his path for breakfast. And it's like, I don't want to be mean about this. I've seen clips of RFK arguing with people. I really think this is overstated. And I think that like, kind of, I guess my bottom line feeling about this, and I know this is a an issue where some section of the audience can disagree with me and all that, and that's fine. But like, my feeling is that the problem with just debunking conspiracy theorists on MSNBC is that the people who are listening to the conspiracy theorists aren't going to watch you do it on MSNBC. They're not going to click over to the Daily Beast to watch you, to read you doing it there. That we live in a super fragmented media landscape, and as Nathan Robinson said, we were talking about this on Twitter, if you debunk an argument in the woods and nobody's around to hear, doesn't really matter, right? Like, I think that I think that not doing it is a pretty bad look. I think that itself creates a sort of pretty powerful narrative, for the anti-vaxxers, and arguably is actually more damaging than anything that RFK is likely to say at the debate. And yeah, I think that, like, I think I mean, look, I understand the criticism that he would be a neutral moderator or whatever. It's also fine to say no, I'll only do it in a third party platform, whatever. That's all fine. But honestly, if I were him, I'd be pretty inclined to do it there because of the MSNBC problem. Because people who might be listening to RFK, yeah, they're not going to tune into MSNBC to watch you talk about this there, but they might watch you on Joe Rogan.
I think too, like it depends on the person, like who's debating, because
Sure.
when Pete Buttigieg goes on Fox News, it's terrible because he's just chastising people and like he's not winning over anybody. But when Bernie Sanders or Chris Smalls went on Fox, they won over people because they made good arguments. And it sounds like this Cortez, is that right?
Hotez?
Yeah, Hotez. Yeah. I'm not familiar with him. I'm not familiar with his work. But it sounds like he probably has the ability to go on there and make those good arguments, the ones we want to actually be seeing.
Yeah, and even if there's some reason that he wouldn't, right? Like, let's say for the sake of argument, I mean, again, I know he does do a lot of media. He is like a very energetic public facing debunker, but like, let's say for the sake of argument, there's some good reason that Hotez can't do it or shouldn't do it, that he wouldn't be well positioned to or whatever. I think what bothers me most about this is seeing all of the people be like, "Oh no, it's really good that he's not. It'd be really bad for anybody to do this because that would be like, legitimizing them or whatever." And like, one of the things people will say is like, "Oh, should I don't know, geographers debate flat earthers," or Mehdi Hassan I think said should legitimate historians debate Holocaust deniers, or there was a version of this that was directed at my article. I think we have the Post Left Watch tweet. And this is a very funnily named account, by the way, because it's called Post Left Watch, which makes it sound like it's directed at something called the Post Left. And that's a term that, I saw, that used to be used a lot to talk about people like Amy Therese, like a couple of years ago before she just became a conservative. But like, I find it very funny that like Post Left Watch is always tweeting about me. It's like, I'm post left. I'm a member of DSA. But whatever. In the Post Left Watch tweet, sorry, let's get it again. He says that so he's got my article. It's called "Here's Why Legitimate Scientists Should Debate JFK Jr." It's called "Here's Why Legitimate Scientists Should Debate David Icke about lizard people." All right, it's a good line. Credit where credit's due. But also, like, look, if flat earthers or David Icke or Holocaust deniers had anything like the degree of popularity and political influence that anti-vaxxers have, then yeah, unfortunately, you would need to engage with them. Like, I think that's true, right? I mean, I think you can sort of like ignore most of these groups as is because they don't matter and they're distasteful and whatever, But like, if we lived in a world where like, I don't know, flat earthers were like getting a bunch of laws passed in state legislatures to get the flat earth theory taught in, textbooks, then like probably you would actually want, you would want legitimate experts to go out and debunk what they were saying in every available forum and at every opportunity. And, that's where people who might listen to the flat earthers would see you do it.
And we also haven't mentioned, although we've kind of circled around, one of the key points here is that I think Joe Rogan's podcast is the most popular podcast in the country. So, Mehdi Hassan, I think usually, especially, at least rhetorically, I find him like he's good at making these pretty persuasive arguments. But I thought it was really weak because like you're not legitimizing something if it's already being shared on the most popular podcast in the United States. possibly the world, right?
I mean, bluntly, more people probably watched RFK on the Joe Rogan Experience than watched Mehdi Hassan saying that you shouldn't legitimize it on
that's not close.
MSNBC.
And second of all, I think I don't really know what RFK thinks. I saw that
sure
on Majority Report, like Joe Rogan, even to some of RFK's claims, I think about 5G and cancer. He was even like, "What? Are you sure about that?" So like,
sure?
yeah. So, but I think it's kind of a straw man to say that whatever Rogan's politics are the same as like the lizard people, people who talk about. No, like, I mean, yes, he likes conspiracy theories, but like I think most of us who have a lot of straight men in our lives know people who are fans of the Joe Rogan show and find him to be actually much more reasonable than MSNBC. And even if you think that's a travesty, and a lot of things that Joe supports, I find to be, I mean, the way that he comports himself on the vaccine issue is really sad to me. But I think if a lot of what he says I don't think it's fair to compare it to literally like Holocaust denial or lizard people exist, even if he does entertain some. I think people find him very reasonable, and I think, the one last thing is that I think, maybe Hotez is not good at debate, like really bad, and I think it's really cheap for like Elon Musk for various reasons, right? Because he's also just fighting the culture war to say, oh, the reason he would never go on is because he knows he's full of shit. There's obviously other reasons, or he said, he's lying and he knows it. I think that just because someone won't debate, that doesn't mean they're lying. But no, like you said, it's a bad look. And if he's, like you said, if he's really bad at debate and he knows he's just gonna sweat and crumble under pressure, then maybe that's a reason not to do it. If he's literally going to be a pathetic debater. But this whole like basically this platforming discussion again, like when people accuse you of like platforming like Charlie Kirk or something like that, it's just really poor. And I think it's a really poor argument. And I think that if the number one podcast in America was a Holocaust denying podcast or trafficked in Holocaust denial, it'd actually be very brave for a Jewish scholar to go on the show and debate it to their fucking face, right? So
and again, if Holocaust denial was having like, was actually reaching a mass audience and having real world political effects, they're like, I don't know, do the state legislature thought experiment from earlier, but now they're like taking the Holocaust out of, the World War II chapters of history books. Then unfortunately you would need to engage with it, and under those circumstances, I'm really glad we don't live in that world. But in that hypothetical, I think you would. And, whatever you think about Joe Rogan, I mean, I think, I don't know, like I spent a couple hours, drinking whiskey and talking about politics and occasionally disagree and then, whatever with him. And like, I find him very likable, and honestly, his sort of profile of like the kinds of things he's right about, the kinds of things he's wrong about, the kinds of things that, like whatever, it's like this sort of like mixed bag of views or whatever reminds me of a lot of people I've known in the real world, right? Outside of media. I think it's actually a pretty common profile in some ways. I mean, like, not that, I mean, obviously I don't want to make him too much of an everyman. Obviously he's super rich and whatever, but I mean, like, I think that like, just, if you haven't met a few guys who remind you a lot of Joe Rogan in sort of like what they're open to, what they're not open to, what they think, the good opinions, the bad opinions, whatever, you probably don't get out enough because they're everywhere, honestly. But
and I think it's pretty. I mean, like even if you look at Mehdi, he's on MSNBC, right, or like MSNBC or MSNBC at night or something, or Peacock, some offshoot of MSNBC. But I think if you're anywhere from progressive to leftist, I think that what is really the daylight between the Joe Rogan show and MSNBC in terms of like the moral quality of it, and like whether you should go on and false claim. I
mean, look, in some ways, I mean, you want to talk about conspiracy, like, I mean, I am 100% at least on not necessarily everything that he's ever said, don't play that game, but like on the core of the issue, right? I'm 100% on Team Hotez there. I mean, I'm triple vaxxed, and if the CDC ever gets around to saying that people in my age group should take a fourth, fifth, or sixth shot, I'll do that too, right? But I am very convinced that vaccines are good. But like there are conspiracy theories all around. I mean, Russiagate was a conspiracy theory, and I think a pretty dumb one, right? Like in a lot of, or at least a lot of the specific claims that were made, over the course of it. Some of which were made on MSNBC by people like.
But Russiagate kept some of our parents entertained, Ben. So that was it was doing a service, Yeah. You put the Russiagate on the TV for our parents, and that's a good evening for them.
No comment. Yeah, I mean, like when people said, like, yeah, all the liberal boomers who just nodded along, and like MSNBC like said like the thing about the Russian bounties in Afghanistan. It's like, oh, that sounds true. Yeah, and honestly, to my mind, the most morally significant difference between JRE and MSNBC is that unlike the vast majority of hosts on MSNBC, Joe Rogan supported Bernie Sanders in 2020. And I think everybody should take their vaccine. If there's when there was somebody in my life who hadn't, I encouraged them to. And I would again, but I also like, okay, that's one aspect of medicine. I'm actually even more concerned about the larger issue of everybody getting access to medical care, when they need it for all sorts of things. Okay. Final comment on that before we move on is just that I want to I do want to say that going back to how the culture war eats everything, right? So like all the people who, hate Hotez because he's like a pro-vaccine guy is on MSNBC and whatever, we're immediately all over this. And it's like, oh, he knows he's lying. That's the only possible reason he wouldn't do it. All that stupid shit that everybody who rightly hates those people just put, like said, oh, no, it's actually great that he didn't do it. Nobody should do it, right? Mehdi Hasan, who actually wrote a book called How to Win Every Argument. Said, no, nobody should do this, right? Not Hotez, but nobody. I think something I do worry about is that there's a certain kind of technocratic liberalism that is, certainly the dominant ideology of MSNBC that I think sometimes without even, I think it's very easy if you're immersed in this stuff and you kind of think in ways that like the patterns of your thought are really stamped by the kind of day-to-day culture war. It's easy to let yourself be influenced by this way of seeing the world, even if you think of yourself as a leftist or a socialist. And I think that a lot of this sort of anti-debate, anti-persuasion kinds of views really do speak to that because, ultimately, like to my mind, the sort of essential point of socialist politics is what CLR James said. That every cook can govern, that you have this sort of basic trust in working class people to make their own decisions and, and manage their own affairs, right? You don't think that they need to be sort of, benevolently herded around. You think that they're, you think that they're capable of democratic self-government and you want to extend democracy into the workplace. I mean, that is the telos of the socialist project. I mean, if you really believe that, I don't understand this view that it's like very important not to let the wrong views reach the ears of impressionable people that, that you should, I mean, if you don't basically, and I don't want to exaggerate the point, like I understand that lots of people are going to end up believing stupid shit, and lots of people are going to, like, there's no guarantee the right, ideas will always win, etc. All that's true, right? But I mean, this basic lack of trust in the ability of ordinary people to like hear the arguments and kind of figure it out for themselves, I think bothers me on a pretty elementary level. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.